Everybody, it's Chise here. Now, I'm sure to many of you, this is a very confusing video, and you're asking yourselves what compelled me to make it since, when I do upload, this isn't my typical kind of content. TLDR, this is my midterm, and my teacher said I could make a video instead of writing a paper, so here we are. Anyways, a little known fact about me is that I am utterly fascinated by the world of ancient Egypt. The art, the architecture, the culture, the mythology, everything. It all fascinates me, and I want to learn so much more about it. To make a long story short, in fall of 2021, when I was still convinced I was going to be an art major, I took an art history class that focused on art produced in the ancient world prior to the 1400s. Towards the beginning of that class, there was a short 3-ish day long unit focusing on ancient Egypt, and something about that just stuck with me. Now, during spring 2023, I'm taking the full-on class focusing on Egyptian art because I wanted to dive deeper and learn more. We are now at the midpoint of the semester, so I'm coming here to YouTube to post my midterm because I can, and to gush about my love and interest for this subject. So for this assignment, we were tasked with answering 2 of 4 essay questions. The first one I will discuss is, using at least 5 examples of art, architecture, literature, and/or city planning to support your essay, discuss the concept of order in ancient Egypt. Order is very important in most ancient cities, and Egypt was no exception. Order brought a way of life that people were used to, and few dared to deviate from that. This is a concept that we can see throughout many examples of their art and architecture. One thing that was very important to those living in ancient Egypt was death and the journey into the afterlife. Every single person, elite or not, had 3 aspects of themselves: the Ka, Ba, and Ak. But for this part of the video, the only part that is important is the Ka. The Ka is a person's life force. It is their essence or spirit. When they die, it of course exits their body and moves to the afterlife. During the time of the Old Kingdom, one popular bit of architecture was that of a Ka statue put in a serdab. A serdab was part of a tomb where the deceased would receive offerings given to them by other people. There would be a small hole or a slit in one of the walls, and this allowed the spirit of the deceased to pass in and out of their tomb. If one were to look through the hole, they would be met with the sight of the deceased's Ka statue staring back at them. This was a statue that would sit within the serdab and would act as a physical personification of the deceased, so they could receive any offerings while they were in the afterlife. Arguably one of the most popular examples of this is that of King Djoser. This is the oldest known life-size statue found in Egypt and was created around 2628 to 2609 BCE. It was found in his step pyramid complex that is located in modern-day Saqqara. The statue itself sits in the Egypt Museum in Cairo, and in the serdab there is a plaster replica. The afterlife was very important to ancient Egyptians, and all of their kings received elaborate and grand tombs. Even non-royal, elite members of society received somewhat elaborate ones. These tombs were often elaborately decorated, with painted relief carvings showcasing different scenes ranging from a king or whoever the tomb was for, smiting his enemies, a notion that will be important later, or tables with food and other offerings stacked high for them to take into the afterlife. All of these elaborate decorations and statues prove that people care deeply about the process of giving their kings and loved ones a proper burial. I mean, I know that if I didn't really care about someone, I wouldn't put any effort into their burial and preserving their memory. Another example we can see is in the existence of the said festival. This was a festival held about every 30 years or so, where essentially a king would have to prove that they were still capable of ruling. Evidence of this can be found all throughout ancient Egypt, but one example can be again found in the step pyramid complex of Djoser. Within the large Hebsed court, there are 2 large stones that mark the area where Djoser would have to run around as part of the said festival to prove he was still worthy of ruling. Again, this is a festival that would take place after about 30 years of king ruling, so this was not a regular event, but something that did happen repeatedly. You want your leader to be strong and capable of ruling because that way order remains. Your expected way of life remains. If you don't have a competent leader, things can quickly fall into chaos and become disorderly. Arguably, the biggest example of order was how nearly the whole of ancient Egyptian culture and their beliefs were centered around the yearly flooding of the Nile River. When the river would flood, it would leave behind very fertile soil that was perfect for growing crops that would provide food for the citizens and animals. The foliage is and was beautiful. You can even see where the greenery just stops and the desert begins in a nearly clean-cut line in this image provided by my professor. This cycle is depicted in many different examples of artwork, from paintings to carvings inside tombs. The marshes and wildlife the flooding brought with it brought forth many scenes of hunters, hunting. As is depicted in a painting found in a tomb of Nebamun from around 1360 BCE, sometimes we see this hunting depicted as a family activity. In this piece, you can see Nebamun as the main figure, with his daughter between his legs and his wife off to the right. They are hunting birds while sailing on the Nile. It may not be clear at a glance, but you can see the boat right here, and underneath you can see all the fish. Another cool detail is the abstract detail used for the water. Anytime you see this zigzag pattern in ancient Egyptian art, even if no paint is left, that indicates water. Speaking of abstractness, one thing that is very fascinating about art from ancient Egypt is the difference in how realistically animals are portrayed compared to humans. Continuing to use the previous hunting scene, when you take a close look at the birds, fish, and the cat, you can see that they look fairly naturalistic and true to what we know these animals to look like today. But when you look at the humans, they look nowhere near as realistic. A possible reason for this is that when a human was depicted in carvings, paintings, or sculptures, it was more about depicting the idea of a human rather than an accurate portrait of someone specific. For an answer as to why that is specifically, I'm not quite sure. However, I think the concept alone is quite intriguing when you compare it to art from, say, ancient Greece, for example, where their sculptures are very realistic and portrait-like. It even lends further to how important order is in ancient Egypt because this so-called trend that lasts across millennia abstract humans but realistic animals and plants. Oh, and jumping back to the Nile River thing real quickly. When the Nile was flooding, and the farmers were waiting to begin working on their farms and growing new crops, they were tasked with helping to build the Great Pyramids at Giza. It was not aliens. Even without modern technology, humans were perfectly capable of creating such grand structures. Yes, it took them several decades, but it was absolutely possible. Sorry, couldn't not say something about that. So for the last example to describe how order was important to ancient Egypt, I of course have to talk about the famous, or infamous, Akhenaten and how he broke said order. This king of the New Kingdom was a very interesting one. Up until his reign, and then again after, ancient Egyptian religious beliefs were polytheistic. This means that they believed in multiple gods. Some notable examples of that are the god of the sun, Ra, the goddess of healing and magic, Isis, and of course, the deity of cemeteries or the protector of graves, Anubis. However, Akhenaten was different in the fact that when he took over as king, he changed Egypt's beliefs into a monotheistic system, this meaning the belief in only one god. Akhenaten was originally born under the name Amenhotep IV. However, he changed his name to Akhenaten due to the fact that he believed in the sun disk god called the Aten and wanted to be named after said god. However, after being a polytheistic culture for so long, most Egyptians didn't really care for him and quickly forgot about him once he passed. But it wasn't only Akhenaten's belief that set him apart from being the typical king, it was his art style as well. The art style seen throughout ancient Egypt is overall very consistent. Yeah, it does change over time, as any art style does, but it isn't by much. By and large, we see static poses locked in a side view in their paintings or carvings, and rigid, unnatural movement in their statues. However, Akhenaten was radically different when commissioning artwork and statues of himself. As I just mentioned, Egyptian art up until this point was very rigid and lacked naturalistic features. However, Akhenaten would commission statues and other artwork depicting himself and his family in a much different style. He is often depicted with a more rounded, pear shaped body, and in his statues, he is seen with bigger lips, a thinner face, and higher cheekbones. This is very different from what we've seen before. And in the carving specifically, he and his wives are depicted with a bit of a belly to showcase that as royalty, they live a very comfortable life and don't have to worry about food or other necessities. Also, talking about his wives, they are depicted in a far more androgynous way compared to Akhenaten himself than previously seen with kings and their wives. Specifically talking about Nefertiti, the two of them are depicted very similarly. They wore similar clothes, very similar headdresses, and had very similar skin tones. The skin tone one might be confusing for those who don't know, but one thing often used to define the difference between sexes in art before Akhenaten was their skin tones. Men would be depicted with darker skin as they spent more time outside working, while women were depicted with lighter skin as they spent more time inside tending to the house and children. But we can see in many examples that they are predicted fairly androgynously compared to each other and previous artwork of kings and their wives. This also falls in line with his beliefs because the Aten, that monotheistic figurehead Akhenaten believed in, was always depicted without a specific gender. It was just a sun disk that gave life through its rays. To tie this all back to the idea of order, Akhenaten threw a good portion of what ancient Egyptians knew out the window. They were told to believe something completely different from what they had for centuries prior, and he had a fairly drastic difference in art style. It wasn't normal, it wasn't what people expected, and people hated him for it. Once Akhenaten passed away after around 1720 or something years of ruling, the people of Egypt pretty much just forgot about him and immediately went back to the way things had been before he took the throne. The belief system returned to a polytheistic one, as well as the art style they were used to. It was as if his death brought order back to the lives of ancient Egyptian people. I could probably spend hours talking about and make an entirely separate video on Akhenaten, his eccentricities, and why I find him so fascinating, but I'm on a time limit with this midterm, so I unfortunately have to cut it short there. He is such a fascinating pharaoh and is probably my favorite because of how unique he is, also because of his wife Nefertiti, but we'll discuss her shortly. If you guys would want a video on that, let me know because it will probably be a lot more of a casual video. Anyways, all of those examples I just discussed show how important order was in Egypt. Their culture, their beliefs, their rulers, their river, all of that and so much more brought an expectation into people's lives. They expected things to be a certain way so their world would run smoothly and everyone could live good lives. When order was threatened or changed, citizens weren't pleased and changed everything back when they were able. I think order can also be synonymous with comfort in this sense because when you're used to and come to expect something in your day-to-day life, it can bring a feeling of comfort and order. Order and comfort is what we grow to expect in life. Now it's time to move on to that second essay question. This one was a write your own topic/question option, so I did as such. The topic I chose to discuss here is, using at least 3 examples, describe the concept of gender and the role it played in the ancient Egyptian world. In pretty much all ancient societies, women were not known to have very many rights. They were there to bear children, raise them, and then take care of the home. Rarely, if ever, did women hold positions of power or do anything of importance. Even if they were royals, they still did not have anywhere near the amount of power and influence as their male counterparts. However, in ancient Egypt, things were a little bit different. Yes, women still did not have as much influence or power as many rights as men, especially commoner or even most elite women. But at least when it came to queens or general wives of the kings, they did receive better treatment in some sense. Hell, there were even some female pharaohs. One of them was called Hatshepsut, and she is one of the more popular ancient Egyptian pharaohs due to the fact that she was a woman. She reigned during the time of the New Kingdom from approximately 1475 to 1458 BCE, and as far as we can tell, not all that many people hated her while she ruled. She was very powerful, but also didn't like to engage in any wars, so things could remain peaceful. She also had one of the longest reigns, which I believe was about 20 or so years. So, to begin with, we have a woman in power who is very powerful in that position, and that already breaks typical gender roles we expect from the ancient world. However, one thing that was interesting about Hatshepsut was that she would still often depict herself as a male king. A lot of artwork showcases her wearing the traditional Nemes headdress or a fake beard worn by kings, or it was having her depicted with a standard body proportion and clothes that a king would ideally have. This was likely done to send the message that even as a woman, she was still just as capable of ruling and leading people like her male counterparts. There's also her funerary temple, which is quite large, larger than that of Montuhotep II's, which is right next to it. However, within the temple does exist evidence that someone wasn't too fond of Hatshepsut. There are places where there definitely would have been artwork depicting her in very common scenes found in most funerary temples, but there's nothing. It's clear there was something there at one point in time, but somewhere along the line, these paintings or carvings or other decorations were just destroyed. Even though she was breaking traditional gender roles, she still wasn't popular with someone, so they decided to try and erase her. Moving on to my next example, we have probably my favorite piece of ancient Egyptian art out of all of their paintings, statues, architecture, anything. I'm not sure why this is my favorite, but it has stuck with me ever since I first learned about it in 2021, and I just love it. The art piece in question is known as Menkaure with a Queen, and is said to have been made around 2460 BCE. This is a very simple statue. It showcases the king in question, Menkaure, with one of his wives, hence the with a queen instead of with the queen. Menkaure is walking forwards with his wife next to him, who is also walking forwards, and her arms are wrapped around him as they walk. I don't know, there's just something about this statue that is just so amazing to me. It gives this air of love and equality. This is saying to me that this woman is in some way equal to Menkaure, or at least lives a comfortable enough life to where she doesn't have to worry about her rights or safety. When women are portrayed in ancient work, it rarely is it alongside a man, and a royal one at that. So this statue is something special, and I absolutely love it. And for the third and final example that I'm going to use to talk about the idea of gender in ancient Egypt, I'm going to talk about Nefertiti. Yeah, remember how I said I'd talk about her earlier? This is where we do that. As a queen, Nefertiti was unusually powerful. This isn't like Hatshepsut, as she was technically a king who happened to be female, but as a queen, someone who had a position next to the king but was not a king herself, Nefertiti was very powerful. Some people even think that she was a co-ruler alongside her husband Akhenaten. While we cannot confirm this 100%, there is some strong evidence that I would like to discuss here. So this is a carving on something known as a talatat. A talatat is basically just a type of limestone brick that was used to build structures during Akhenaten's reign. They were usually decorated, and this is one example that we have. Now looking at this, you may be thinking, Chise, why is this so special? There isn't a lot of detail, and it just looks like some average decorations. Well, my friend, let me point something out to you. Over on the right side, we can see this scene. It is in sort of this canopy-like area that is on a boat sailing on the Nile River. Within this little area, we can see a figure that is smiting an enemy. This pose is something that you will become very familiar with if you study ancient Egyptian art for any length of time. Kings or other elite people are very commonly depicted in this pose to show their power and status. If they are strong enough to smite and kill their enemies, then they are certainly strong enough to rule and hold power. We can see this as early as the Narmer palette from around 2950 BCE, where we see King Djoser in the same pose. We see it in the previously mentioned hunting scene from the tomb of Nebamun. We see it a lot. It is there to showcase one's power. But why is it important here? Well, one thing you need to know about Nefertiti is that the headdress she is seen wearing is unique. No other queen that we know of wears this headdress. It is unique to her and her alone as far as we are aware. When you take a close look at the smiting scene on this talatat, and you look at the person doing the smiting, The headdress they are wearing looks an awful lot like Nefertiti's. Now, this idea is highly contested. We do not know for sure that this is Nefertiti. It could be Akhenaten for all we know. However, based on some other information I found, I can say that I almost 100% believe that this is Nefertiti. So, quick backstory here. In my ancient Egyptian art class, I've sort of become the go to person for looking up random facts on the fly. If another student asks, hey, how tall was this statue? And the professor says, I'm not sure. I've sort of become the go to person who quickly Googles that question to find out. A couple weeks ago, I did just that when we were talking about the famous head bust of Nefertiti. And after we moved on and we're talking about the Talitot, I decided to take a quick look at her Wikipedia to see what other information I could learn about her. But what I found there actually shocked me. When you scroll down to the life section, you will be met with a few images. One of them showcases a stone relief carving depicting someone who is definitely Nefertiti smiting a female captive. This pose and the scene surrounding her, it is all very similar to what we see on the Talitot, but is definitely a lot clearer. In ancient Egypt, we only ever see kings and other elite men smiting enemies. Women simply do not have enough power to be depicted doing the same because back then, they were still seen as less than men. But if this is indeed Nefertiti, then that shows that she was very, very likely not just a queen alongside Akhenaten. She was a co-ruler with equal power. I don't know if I can properly express in words how mind-blown I was when I found this out. I immediately raised my hand to tell the professor that day, and she even came over to look at my laptop because she was also, just as surprised. Women typically just did not have this kind of power. They were never the ones to smite their enemies because they weren't meant to be powerful. But Nefertiti being depicted in the smiting your enemies pose, she was a ruler. She had to have been. She wasn't just another one of Akhenaten's wives. She held real and true power. Hell, she might have even continued to rule and lead Egypt on her own after he died. Not confirmed, but it's definitely possible. Ancient worlds all had archaic gender roles that didn't allow for women to have many rights or power, and for the most part, Egypt followed suit. But with this Talitot, with Nefertiti, she absolutely destroyed the gender roles put in place and was likely a true ruler alongside a man. She and her husband didn't seem to care about gender or what she was expected to do because of hers. She and her husband just did what a royal would do and led their people. Again, I don't think I can properly express how much I was mind blown when I found this out, and just how much I love Nefertiti because of it. I love this so much. I love Akhenaten, and I love Nefertiti. These two are just so fascinating, to me with how many stereotypes and expectations they shattered. Your gender doesn't define what roles you fill, and I think Nefertiti proves that amazingly. Anyways, I think that is going to be it for the video. I know this is nothing like what I've ever put out on this channel, but my professor gave me the chance and I ran with it. But also, I love ancient Egypt, and I always love talking about it with my family, so why not share it here with you guys as well? If you like this video and are curious to know more about what I've learned in this class, feel free to let me know in the comments. I would love to make more videos on this subject. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.